Good day, Gen X talking. All you Gen Xers out there, how you doing? I'm Ed Wasson. I'm here with my good friend Matt Marshall. Welcome to Gen X Talkin' Storytime. And today our story is called Trip to the Desert Caverns. Our story today deals with good college buddies Tommy, John, Jason, and their girlfriends Jenny, Casi, and Kiersa. These fine American youth just got through their junior year at Shamon U University in New York City. Now they have the opportunity, time, space, and money-wise, and they've chosen to travel to the famous Desert Caverns of New Mexico. So, full disclosure here, everybody, in reality, part of this scenario strongly resembles something that I personally experienced with friends while hiking in Western US. We were hiking one day in, I think it was Big Sur and Morro Bay area of California. And there's several hikes we used to do out there while I was with the Defense Language Institute learning Arabic, and different friends that were soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines and stuff. We'd go out for a weekend and hike 2 to 4 hours up and around the hills. There's some really nice areas to hike to out there. And on one of our hikes, one of the soldiers got to the turnaround point and then couldn't make it back. They were just done. And what we had to do was basically have somebody stay with them while the rest of us hiked back. And we got in our vehicles and we had to drive, I think, almost an hour around to the other entrance. And then basically go down a different trail closer to them from that point. I can't remember if that guy twisted his ankle or what happened. But anyway, you've done a lot of hiking, haven't you, Matt? Have you done anything like that where you had something like that happen?
You know, not necessarily where someone's gotten injured. Probably the closest thing, and I'm actually about to do a speech on this for my company where we're supposed to tell a story about, the term is 327 seconds of awesome, where you're supposed to give a 5-minute speech on something cool that happened to you. And I'm thinking of back in December when I was up in Southern Colorado doing a hike to Ice Lake near Silverton, Colorado. And it's basically a 3,000 foot ascent and about 4 miles up to the lake. And then you got to make your way back. I was there early in the morning, and there was only one other hiker. And where we were, there was no weather, there was no anything, right? But it's 3,000 feet up. So about halfway up, we started hitting snow, not snow falling, but about 4 to 6 inches of snow. And by about the last mile of the hike up, we were walking in knee-deep snow. So neither one of us were totally prepared for snow hiking, but at least I had my wool socks and boots and jeans and really comfortable clothing. And I had food and water and all my preparedness junk. And he had basically nothing. So this kid, he was maybe 19, 20 years old. He was wearing hiking sneakers. I don't know if he even had long socks. I think he had short socks. So you could see his feet and his ankles as he's walking through all this snow. He's totally cool with it, having a great time. And I'm just going, dude, you should have been prepared. I actually wound up giving him my gaiters because he was freezing by the time he got up there.
Did you have an extra pair of wool socks to get him? Because wool socks will stay at least a little warm, even if they're wet, right?
They would, yeah, it would have been great. But no, all I had was gaiters. And honestly, the guy wasn't complaining at all. I mean, I don't think he brought any food. I think he just brought water. And it was easily 4 hours up. It only took me, I don't know, an hour and a half to get down because it was all downhill. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was coming down with the flu. So I was going, man, what is wrong with me? Because I live near the sea where it's really low elevation, and I'm in Colorado where it's very high elevation. So I thought, man, this elevation is killing me. But I didn't realize that the next day I started doing all the flu stuff, I guess. But it was an awesome, awesome hike. Beautiful. I posted videos of Ice Lake when I got up there.
Yeah, I saw some of those. That's great, and great bunch of beauty to explore if you're hiking. And it's a good hobby to have, but you got to be prepared.
Yeah.
And in accordance with our story, this college group of friends, they plan their flights, they pack their bags, and figuring out they're going to be in the hot desert, they all pack shorts and short sleeve tops and shirts and things like that. Figuring they might do a bit of hiking on some of the trails, they take small backpacks with pockets for water bottles and things like this. So they think they're ready, right? Well, there's some things about different wilderness or outdoors areas that it looks fun on pictures or paper, but when you actually get out there, things can be a little bit different. As the story goes, the group arrived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they rented their car. They drive out to the Desert Caverns. It's about 3.5 hour drive from Albuquerque to these caverns. And the town near the caverns is called TikTok.
I love this.
It got its name from the Chinese social media app, and China gave the town an amount of money to change their name. They needed the money because the demographics in New Mexico is probably like the 49th out of 50 on the socioeconomic situations there. And true story, this is actually how Truth of Consequences got its name. Now, this is a fictional scenario, but there is a real town in New Mexico called Truth or Consequences. And now I can't remember what the town's name was before, but they chose to name their town after a 1950s radio game show. So this fictional town near the Desert Caverns is called TikTok. Just the story time. We're trying to make things interesting here. And like I said, New Mexico is one of the poorest states in the United States. And with that infusion of money, the town invested in tourism. They paved some of their streets because some of their streets weren't even paved. And they got themselves a Walmart, a McDonald's, and a Marriott hotel, but nothing too fancy. It's just a Marriott courtyard. Yeah. So the townsfolk are actually very friendly to tourists, which is a little bit different because different places you travel, you run into locals of different levels of friendliness. People in some places of New Mexico and other states in the West, some of them are friendly and some of them are not, just so everybody knows. But these townsfolk, they have pamphlets of information and everybody's advising. There's all kinds of information out there. The pamphlets for tourism will tell you, if you're going to tour in this area and you're going to do some of the hikes around the caverns, you probably need to drink at least 1 gallon of water per day per person in the summer. They also advise you strongly never stray off of the main trails. Any idea why that might be, Matt?
Well, I think we're going to find out in the story. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think that when they visit the desert, that they'd be able to see if they go off the trail or whatever. But one of the things I found out when we were in Sonoma, it's very easy to get off the trail and then go, okay, I'm not sure which way is back to the trail or where I lost the trail, you know? So it happens far too often, I think.
Yeah. That's the thing with different terrains. If you're in the mountains and the forest, you can't see through the trees basically, and sometimes find prominent terrain features. And that's the same thing with the desert. Desert, you'll get out there and freak out because you can see for miles, tens of miles, but still, sometimes you can't find a prominent terrain feature and try to do your dead reckoning navigation back to where you need to be. So probably best to have an actual lymphatic compass, maybe even a paper map, and know what trails you're on and what other trails are out there, because there's a lot of little paths and trails in the desert. The desert's wide open. You get off that trail a little bit, and the next thing you know, you're just like in a blank slate of territory.
I think that's honestly one of the advantages of hiking in forests is generally the trail is pretty clear. If it's not snowing or fog or anything like that, you can see the trail. But in the desert, that's one of the problems, I think, is it's so easy to get off the path because I don't think the trails are followed as much as you might get out east. But also the wind comes in, blows sand over the trail, and all of a sudden all footprints are gone. And you're going, okay, I have no idea where the trail is at this point. So it can happen.
So we're starting to run into some pitfalls with the group already because they're staying a night at the hotel in TikTok, and they're going to drive a little ways after breakfast to get to the trailhead, go down into the caverns and head out. They're hearing all this information from the locals. They're seeing it and reading it in the pamphlets and everything else like that to make sure you're hydrated, stay on the trails. And they're strongly advised to have long pants, good hiking shoes, and maybe even a hat to cover up because the sun in the desert is relentless. And what happens with a lot of people when they come out from different areas and they come into a desert is the desert in a lot of areas is a dry heat, and your sweat evaporates and it cools you off. So you feel like it's not that hot. It's almost an illusion. They'll get out there and they'll say, well, while I'm out here, I'll just wear shorts and a short sleeve t-shirt or something because I want to get a little bit of sun. But you're out there for less than an hour and you could be smoked. You need to protect yourself and not think you're going out there to both hike and be in the wilderness and be outdoors almost all day and get a little bit of a tan. So they wake up the next morning, they have their breakfast. Tommy drives them out the rest of the way. They find the camping site, main parking lot. They each have 2 gallons of water. Prior to getting there, they had to stop at Walmart and get themselves some long pants and long shirts and stuff like that. So there's mistake number 1, possibly worth talking about. Now, they also got larger coolers on wheels and large enough to have enough picnic items to eat small meals through a couple of days. So they left some items in an additional large cooler full of ice, drinks, and food in the car. So they're going to go down there, hike. They think an hour or 2, they're going to get to the caverns and everything's going to be cool. But here's a twist in the story too. Casi has type 1 diabetes. Oof. So 2 or 3 of the friends that were familiar with that situation, but they didn't know all of the special ramifications that this entails. Casi needs to be really prepared for a lot of different things because type 1 diabetes, you've got to constantly monitor your blood sugar levels and everything else through the day. I mean, there's a lot of people with type 1 diabetes that are just living through it and they're good to go. But when you have somebody in your group that has a medical condition like that, everybody needs to be a little bit more alert and aware of what that situation is. So she has to monitor herself frequently and make sure she has enough insulin on this trip for at least an extra 5 days. So she's good to go. Now, Cassie's been through some stuff experience-wise with her medical condition, so she's prepared, and her boyfriend knows what's going on, and a couple of other people in the group, they know what's going on, and they start hiking down this trail. Everything's going great on the way down because from the main parking lot to get down to the main entrance of the caverns is almost all downhill. Very nice grade, very nice path. In the morning that day, it only gets up to about 90 degrees. There's plenty of shade. So it's not what we call a hot trail. Go down there, they get to the caverns. They spend a few hours in the caverns seeing everything that they want to see. And then it's time to head back out and head back up to the campground. Here's the thing, a couple miles into their trip back, they decide to stop off the side of the trail in a clearing in the hilly desert and camp there overnight, which that's fine too. They have enough in their backpack for maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days. So they camp overnight. They're not bad campers. I mean, when you're that young, you're risk taking and you don't need to be, an Eagle Scout. Maybe you have a can of beans or you know how to light a little fire, everything else like that. So everybody's fine, cool, and dandy for a night. Yeah. This is not wilderness survival. This is actual leisure camping. So not bad. But they wake up in the next morning and everything is fine. They get a small, quick breakfast, a cup of coffee. They pack up their tents. They clear their site. But about a mile along the return journey from the campsite, with probably only about 4 miles to get to the main campsite and parking area where their rental car is parked, trouble starts. So first, it's a blazing hot day. By 11 a.m., it's already about 96 degrees. Again, it's a dry heat, but like if it's in the 90s by 11 and there's no clouds, you know it's just going to get hot. So they start walking up, and they're about 90 minutes into their hike back up. And keep in mind, this is all going back uphill now. So they're about 4 miles into it before they realize, because they stopped, they camped the night before, they had maybe a couple of beers and a glass of wine. They weren't staying really cognizant and aware. They're trying to relax, but now they realize they're off the main trail. So they've gotten off on the wrong side of the trail, and being so remote, the traditional cell phone apps for maps, they're not working. Their cell phone is telling them a general area roughly of where they are, but it's not pinpointing exactly where they are on all of these trails. Being so remote, the traditional cell phone map apps are not working the way you want them to work. They're showing you the general area that you're in, but they don't even have trails on most of these apps. You may have to download a special app, if they have them at all, for some remote locations. So it happens to be Casi who breaks out an actual paper map and the compass, and she ultimately discovers they are off track. And now they're about 8 miles from the main camp and the parking lot. And it's a bit uphill, but most of the way. And by the time they figured it all out, it's just past high noon and the temperature's over 100 degrees. And it's going to start getting hotter. Lastly, John, who is about a 360-pound football player, twists his ankle on the trail, and he can't walk on his own now. So they're starting to get into a hurt lock here. So at that point, what do you think would be your immediate actions, Matt?
I'm thinking it all comes back to preparedness and being prepared. And as I was reading through this story and understanding it, I'm thinking shoulda, woulda, coulda. If you were wearing hiking boots instead of Teva sandals, or even sneakers, if you're wearing sneakers, you put yourself at risk of twisting. And if you twist your ankle, a really good twist, or you roll your ankle on a rock or something like that, man, oh man. And him being such a big dude, that's a rough road trying to carry him out.
Yeah. So now if you were, just a couple of miles away from where you parked your vehicle, maybe you could get a guy on each side and basically help him up.
Kind of buddy carry him,
Buddy carry him up there for a mile or two.
Yeah.
But now you've discovered you're about 8 miles off, and at a pace of about 2, maybe 3 miles an hour, going uphill, and it's 100 degrees and probably going to get to about 110 or more in the next hour or two. So you got all that going on, and now it's decision time. You got to start thinking about those contingencies. You got to plan for those contingencies. Now, these guys are young guys.
Yeah.
So you remember when you and I were young, we could have taken something like this, but we're in our 50s now, bro.
What?
And I keep thinking I'm working out. I'm trying to stay in shape, but it's taken longer to recover, of course.
Yeah.
And that's if you're staying in shape. Just think if you want to go out with your wife and kids or something like that, and you're in your 40s or 50s, and you've lived a sedentary life and you haven't been staying in really good shape, especially through the pandemic. You want to go out and get in the Desert Caverns on a trailhead. You got 8 miles one way, 8 miles the back, and now somebody in your family has a twisted ankle, and you got hundreds of pounds of gear and stuff to carry. It's going to be rough. So the group decides that Jason will stay with John while all the others hook it as quickly as they can back to the vehicle.
Yeah.
And then they're going to drive the vehicle back along a circuitous route to the other end of the park, where they found another remote parking lot that's only about a mile from where John and Jason are. And from there, they can extract them. So fortunately, all of that goes as planned. Tommy, Casi, Kiersa, and Jenny all make it back to the main camp where their parking lot is. They find their rental car. They're getting ready to go. And they drive the route to get to the other side of the park, which takes another 45 minutes. And they park there and they hike all the way down that trail and they all help John and Jason hobble him back up that mile to the rental vehicle. And I will say that that's not an uncommon or unlikely scenario, right, Matt?
Yeah. Now, I think you're being a bit positive about what the outcome really would be in this type of situation, because granted, you do have the disclaimer of these are young people, and two young, strong guys can help hobble along a 360-pound dude, but that's a hard day of labor. And it's no longer 2 miles per hour or 3 miles per hour. It's more like maybe you're hitting 1 mile an hour. So it is a good idea that they drove around to the other side to get as close as possible the vehicle to the stranded folks. I think it happens all too often. And that's why they have so many rules and signs when you go into these national parks and state parks and stuff that say, beware of rattlesnakes, carry water with you, carry extra water with you, make sure you're wearing the proper clothing to enter into this type of area.
So Matt, tell our listeners and our viewers, where's the best place to store your water?
In a camelback or a bladder inside of your backpack. Yep.
If you get out there in a place like that and you get hurt and you're down, if you've stayed hydrated, you might make it another 2 or 3 days without any other water. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I know we're being really light with this scenario, but you've been through a couple of scenarios. I've been through a couple of scenarios. We hiked in one spot in the desert, and we each carried 5-gallon water jugs, one in each hand. And we had probably 40 pounds on our back, not counting our weapons. I think we may have been going a little over 2 miles an hour, even in the coolness of the night.
Yeah.
But you're carrying a lot of gear. And there's a scenario I talked about recently in my TikTok about Bravo 20, British SAS inserted deep into Iraq during Desert Storm. And they had to hike with about 100 some odd pounds on their backs plus water jugs. And it's disputed how far they walked because there's different accounts, and you know how soldiers are. So a couple of them wrote books about this, and they were saying they hiked about 20 some odd miles with all this gear. Another SAS guy went out there years later, and he said, I hiked with all that same gear and I was completely done after 2 miles. There was no way that they hiked that far with all this gear.
Yeah.
So you got to keep in mind what kind of gear you have, your conditions. And in that scenario, several members of their team actually ended up perishing. Some of them escaped and got out, and some of them were later released after they got captured. And then I did another hike in the California desert, and this nearly exact scenario happened. Somebody twisted their ankle halfway through the hike, and we've got about over an hour and a half of quick walking to go. So I'm going to guess it was maybe close to 5 or 6 miles. Now, in this story, the kids got out okay. And at the end of the day, as the story goes, they were completely smoked. They got back into town. They got John's ankle looked at, and the docs were able to give them aid at an aid station in town. And they're just entirely wiped out. And they decided, instead of camping out that night near the trail or whatever, they were just going to get a hotel room again, and they're just done. So they crash in their beds and they just get on a plane in Albuquerque the next day, and they're done.
Well, hey there, Gen Xers. Ed and I wanted to introduce you to PackRabbit, our newest affiliate group. PackRabbit grew from one person's desire to craft a healthier and more efficient way to carry a pack. Now, PackRabbit is a small company made up of entrepreneurs, hunters, athletes, military, and outdoor enthusiasts. Their designs are influenced by diverse backgrounds and personal experiences that tilt them heavily towards simplicity and utility. PackRabbit believes that multifunctionality is not a condition of luxury, but an absolute necessity. One key aspect of several of their backpacks is a folding shelf that turns into a rather comfy seat when out on the trail. We invite you to check them out. The link for their website is in the show notes.
So, Matt, what are some spots here where you think they went wrong?
In my mind, playing out potential scenarios and thinking, okay, take care of the basics first, having the ability to start a fire, to collect or to have more water than you need or than you think you'll need, protection from the elements, shelter. So fire, water, shelter, and then emergency supplies, first aid, those type of things. If he was wearing boots, he wouldn't have rolled his ankle. From a positive perspective, they did listen to the townsfolk. And when the townsfolk said, bring more water, they brought more water. When they said, don't be dumb and wear shorts, wear long pants. Okay, so they stopped by, got some long pants. And that's probably the best I can say positive wise. It did sound like the one gal Casi was a little bit more prepared.
Yeah.
But if you've never done a hike before, that's more than, just a couple of miles long. One absolute key is bring a map and a compass and know how to flip to use it, because you just practice it. There's orienteering and navigation courses that you can take that'll teach you about these things. And you pointed out several times how to identify an object or something that you can use as a navigation source. So those are just a few of the basics that I was thinking as I was reading through the story.
I think those are all sound pieces of advice and observations. The other question I was going to ask you is, again, how realistic do you think this scenario was? How frequently do you think something like this occurs?
In certain areas, I think it happens a lot.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest areas it happens, honestly, is California. And people don't realize how close to the desert California is. There's Nevada, there's Arizona. Arizona is nothing but a desert and high mountain desert. And I think the reason why I think California, it happens more is, I'm not sure if it's exactly laws or if it's just, you absolutely need to do this before you think you're going to go into this desert. Because if you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. Not only is it dangerous, but think about what that group of kids felt like after, when they were going into this. They were all excited. They're going to experience the caverns, and then they're going to camp out for several nights, and it's going to be so cool. Well, they didn't get to do the last night because they screwed up so bad, or because they had such bad luck. I guess that's the biggest situation.
Kind of bad luck,
kind of bad luck. But being better prepared could have helped their luck be a little bit better. My point is, I'm thinking it happens more in California. They created more laws or rules or regulations to make people stop doing dumb things like that. Now, granted, people still do it, but there's just so many people out in California, and there's a lot of national and state parks where people can get into dangerous situations. So that's why I think
this type of scenario happens all the time. A long time ago, there was an Air Force pararescue guy. I believe he was a pararescue instructor of wilderness survival and other things at the part of the school that's in Kirtland Air Force Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And for whatever reasons, he decided to stage his own death. In some way, somebody got part of his bereavement or his will. And then later, he also started robbing banks. And he was running from the cops at some point in time, and he went up into the Sandia Mountains, and he was only up there for like 2 days before he turned himself in, because wilderness survival special Air Force guy ran into some poison oak. I think that was about 20 years ago. But there's another story just a year or two ago. It was a former Green Beret and his brother, and they were hiking up somewhere around Big Bear Mountain in California. And they got lost. Nobody knew where they were. They were gone 3 or 4 days. I'll have to read the rest of the story as to how it happened, but this guy's brother died. So you got that going on. You've got all kinds of critters out there, desert or mountains. You got snakes, spiders and scorpions, coyotes and bobcats. They're all out there. And if you go out there, you're actually going to see them.
Yeah.
So you got a lot of little things to try to avoid out there. Another thing, Matt, what do you think about going out on a hike somewhere out there for over 4 hours and it's the summertime and you're just wearing shorts and a t-shirt?
No. I mean, as a kid, I probably would have done something dumb like that and not been prepared, but there's no chance I would do that without having multiple gallons of water. That's a rough day again.
Here's another consideration is this is a small group. What if you're in a larger group? Who's in charge of keeping track of everybody? There's been military groups that go out and then at the end of every movement, you're moving from point A to point B to get to the objective or the rally point, or you do a head count and you make sure your head count is solid, and you have subordinate leaders of teams underneath you doing those head counts, and everybody's got to know where everybody's at.
In the military type of scenarios, do they use like a buddy system or anything like that?
That's an outstanding question, Matt. Absolutely. Everywhere you go, whether it's Air Force, Navy, Army, Marines, Army calls it your battle buddy. If you're in the Rangers, they call it your Ranger buddy. And in the Marines, you're always in at least a two-man team. So you have your buddy, and you have a two-man team system all the time, everywhere you go. And you are your brother's keeper. If you don't know where your buddy is, you're wrong.
Yeah.
So if you're camping out in the wilderness, like in this scenario here, these guys would have had to have built themselves basically an outdoor bathroom area, a little cat hole of sorts. So they go off the trail a little bit. You don't have to go over 100 yards away from your campsite, but you probably want to go at least 25 to 50 yards away from your campsite, dig a hole. And that's where everybody's going to go. And nobody goes to this hole alone. Night or day, you and a buddy are going there together, and you're coming back together. So in this case, we had couples. A lot of couples will not think about, if you're on some kind of trip or whatever, do you really watch out after your significant other that closely that you walk with them to the bathroom?
Well, the other thing I think it's awfully dangerous is, when's the last time you got into an argument or a fight with your spouse or your significant other? And is it really top of mind at that point in time to watch out and make sure they're, really taken care of? Now, I know that if I'm in a situation where I'm responsible for the family or whatever it may be, even if I'm in a fight with my wife, I will shut up, not say a word, because all that's going to do is continue the argument. But I will switch off the argument side of me and turn on the preparedness side of me and just go, nope, we are linked at the hip and we are working together.
Absolutely. You just hit the nail on the head, because one other thing I'll point out is, regardless of who your ranger buddy, your battle buddy, or whoever it is, regardless of who they are, it can be your boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, spouse, whatever. You need to know them like the back of your hand. Maybe even have physical and verbal duress signals, or you just take a look at their face, or you see that the way they're walking back to the camp, and then wait a second, something is wrong. And she's trying to tell you, I got a bear following me or something like that. It can be anything. But the one thing I want to point out about what you just said, Matt, is knowing your partner, knowing your team dynamic. If you want to consider, I always tell my wife, Nisha, you and I are a team, and it's you and I against the world. And you and I have to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. When Nisha and I went to Egypt, I told her, you're going to see some stuff that you ain't ever seen before, poverty-wise. It is bad out there. And we've been to Mexico and other places like that. When she got to Egypt, she was like, holy cats. This is some serious stuff. I said, you stay with me. You keep your head on a swivel, because I'm with Nisha and her daughters, and we're walking in a mall in America. They don't say nothing to me. I take my eyes off them for a second and I have no clue where they went. And they won't tell me or nothing. I'll be trying to text them on the phone. So I said, when we get to Egypt, that stops. You have to be with me. I have to know where you're at. You don't stop, look at anything, go anywhere without me knowing. And I stay with you. And we ended up having to walk through some street areas where I said, hey, we are not in a touristy area. We're not in a friendly area. We need to get from point A to point B. Don't stop to talk to nobody. Keep very alert.
That term, head on a swivel, we use that all the time. Recently, we had some struggles with a local neighborhood hoodlum, and the guy was just an absolute jerk. And that was a term I had to teach Kristen. She didn't know what it meant initially. But if you think about it, if you're constantly moving and looking different directions, and your situational awareness has to go way up. When you're in a situation, you know you're in danger or potentially in danger. Using that term and having that term in your mind when you think you might be in a possibly dangerous situations, head on a swivel. Always be watching and looking for anything that might happen.
They say stay alert and stay alive. Yeah, Nisha has a habit of doing that, and it was good that she was able to turn that off and turn herself on to another level of awareness. But when you do that and you're walking around town or out in the woods or anywhere else for 2 solid hours with your head on a swivel, or you're on a patrol or whatever you're doing, that becomes exhausting because your awareness level is here. Maybe you drank a little caffeine to stay a little bit more on the edge. But when that piece of your journey is done and you start coming down.
Oh, it's exhausting. And that's probably the biggest thing about, like you said, if you don't have people with you that can operate in that mindset, you become the situational awareness person. Being the head on a swivel for your entire family becomes very, very exhausting.
It is.
You know, when you're on vacation and you're at Disney World and you're constantly head on a swivel, you are not enjoying yourself at that point. I'm trying to safely get somebody from point A to point B. Like you said, it's very difficult.
I mean, in one way, depending on the scenario, you do want to try to enjoy yourself wherever you're at, but you have different levels of awareness for different scenarios. Here on this scenario that we just talked about, they're at a certain level for certain points. And when things start going wrong, in this group situation, they had to be able to shift gears into different things, get into critical thinking and problem solving mode. And granted, this is a pretty simple task. We're not talking about putting a special forces team through the Q course. In this story, they were enjoying themselves up to a point. And then at the end, when they got John back up and they're done for the day, we're going to go back to a hotel room, have a couple of beers and crash. And fly home, right? Still a simple situation, but you got to think of Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it probably will. So no matter where you go and what you do, you need to try to plan accordingly because, Matt, like you said, we want you to respond well and recover faster. If you're prepared, you're at a certain state and you know your plan a little bit and you know your contingencies, and you don't necessarily have to stay so alert that you're not enjoying yourself. You can kind of bump it down a little bit in some scenarios, still be all right, and still enjoy yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, to me, I use the most typical Disney World or whatever, because to me, it's hard because as an individual, I've driven through what I feel like are some of the most dangerous places in the world. I've done some really, really dumb things unknowingly in some cases. But the thing throughout my life that has brought me the most fear is something bad happening to my kids or my wife. And so it's just a natural response for me to fall into that higher level of situational awareness when I've got them and I'm trying to teach them about being more aware about what's going on around you. You can still have fun. Relaxed awareness, I think, was the term we used in one of the last couple of episodes. The idea is you can very quickly move from relaxed awareness to high awareness because you hear something that's outside the ordinary, a scream, something that sounds like a shot, a backfire, and immediately your level of awareness just starts going, wait a minute, that's not right. It's an interesting way of approaching it for sure.
I think it was Adam Sandler, the comedian, says he's making a joke about before he got married and had kids or whatever, he'd go out and he'd say, wallet, keys, cell phone, I'm going.
Yep, I'm going.
Now he's got like wallet, keys, cell phone, this and this and this.
Yeah.
So before you go out, you need to have that rhythm where you're checking wallet, keys, cell phone, whatever you need. If you're in a combat situation, you're going outside the wire. Before you go out, you stop somewhere and do a dry fire on your firearm. Are you going somewhere where you're expecting at least some kind of wind or dust? You got to put on eye pro. You've got to put on gloves so you have hand pro. You put your rifle on a 1-point sling versus having it completely slung. Do you have enough water? All this kind of stuff. It's not a lot of work. It takes 5 minutes.
But I think the important thing is, in order to have that in your mind when you get ready to leave, you got to be repetitive. You got to do that on an everyday basis. You got to practice those type of things. And it's the same in everyday preparedness. You have to, like you said, those things that you always must have with you. I know I always have my phone in my right front pocket. I know I always have my reading glasses and my key in my left front pocket. My wallet's always in my back left pocket. If I buy a pair of pants that doesn't have at least those 3 pockets, I don't buy that pair of pants. So I know when I'm walking out the door, all I have to do is just barely feel my phone's there, my keys there, my wallet's there, I'm ready. Our kids are adults and they're doing their own thing. And I'm like, hey, you're living with the consequences of what you do. If you come without your wallet, then you're not spending any money when you get there because I'm not buying some for you. Those are the type of harsh realities sometimes that they have to live through.
Now, Nisha, before I met her, she was a lot more of a fly by the seat of her pants type gal. She didn't plan. And if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. And she'd say, I never plan because it never works out. And I've gotten her into a more assertive and positive mode in a lot of ways when we do international travel. You can't do certain things without some level of planning and preparation. I mean, we're not talking about just driving down the road and going to the grocery store or planning a little birthday party for the grandson. We're talking about an international trip type of situation. We're not going to just get in the truck and go. People don't plan to fail. They fail to plan.
Yeah. My daughter wants to be a traveler. We've talked about it a couple of times before. I keep telling her, I will pay for you to go to places in the United States. I'll pay to get you to these places. And you go experience places within the United States. Then you can do your international travel. But you got to get a year's worth of travel and doing stuff on a regular basis inside of a place where you need to know the language, you need to know the culture, you need to know the people that you're going to be interacting with. Because when you get to a place that you don't know the culture, you don't have the money, or you don't know the exchange rates, then you put yourself into an incredibly dangerous situation. There was a great movie, a series called McMafia. There's one particular episode where the young lady, you see her, she's coming in on an airplane. Somebody's standing there with a sign. It's got her name on it. She's like, oh yeah, I'm this person or something like that. I think it was like her first name or something like that. And he's like this really cool kind of hip guy. And they're like, okay, I've got you. I've got the ride. Is this all you have? Okay. Yep. Great. We'll set it in the back here. And she's kind of paying attention, but she's like, man, this is so great. This guy's so cute. He's happy. He's being nice to me. And she has no idea where she's going in this place.
And she's overwhelmed. She's young, she's inexperienced, and she's overwhelmed.
And she's looking around and she's completely oblivious to all the little bitty nuances of his communications with the guy that's just outside his car door. And he kind of winks or does this look at him. And then he goes, yep, we've got one. That's kind of the sign. And within a day, she is sold to another group. She's brought into a world of trafficking where she's essentially a sex slave from that point on in the story. And just to see, she had so many high hopes going into this new foreign city that she'd never been to. And it all was gone because she wasn't prepared for what was coming.
Yeah. And I think especially for this story time, this group of college kids traveled from their university area in the East Coast of the US to the desert sands. Like you're saying, you're going to get your daughter more into travel slowly.
Yeah.
And I will say also for especially college or military personnel, you start getting out of college, you start getting out of the military, and maybe you have a little bit more of the travel bug. You don't want to be in that mentality where I can just fly into Iraq or I can just fly into Mexico City all by myself and do tourism. Because previously when you were there, you were in Cancun, Mexico, on a resort area with a huge college, or you were in Iraq with a huge military group on a deployment. You're not going to fly into Mexico City by yourself or just with a couple of people and just go wherever you want. You get out of the tourist areas, and the next thing you know, in Mexico, you're probably just kidnapped, which you might be lucky with that, but they're just wanting to get some money out of you. Yeah. You go somewhere else like Iraq because you think you're going to fly in there and go see the Babylonian Gardens. You fly in there and you don't know anybody in the area. You're probably still got ex-US military practically tattooed on your forehead. And you'll be lucky if it's just kidnapping you get away with. So you got to think about different things. And you could go somewhere like even as innocuous as, let's say, Costa Rica. And you think nothing is going on in Costa Rica. We're just going to go down there. And the next thing you know, there's still all kinds of seedy scenarios down there. And you got to be cognizant of it. You don't want to get roofied. You don't want to wake up one day and your daughter is missing out of your hotel room or she never came back that night. That would be the worst way to wake up. So you got to have contingency plans. Of course, most of our listeners and viewers or whoever, they're not afraid. They want to live their life. And some of them are probably want to go out and camp and maybe do some travel and stuff like this. But you got to have some kind of experience when you get out there. Going back to when I was a cop, if you're going on a trip, you're going to plan for one thing. If you're doing this, you're planning for another thing. Before I would go on shift as a cop, I'd get in my uniform and I'd stand in front of a full-length mirror and I would draw out my sidearm 10 times real quick. It's muscle memory. I never had a taser, but there would never be a time that I would mistake my firearm for my taser or my pepper spray. Yeah, right. I got my radio here. I checked my battery in my handheld. All those kind of things, PCCs, PCIs. You got to think about these things like almost second nature.
Isn't that one of the biggest challenges, though, of travel, whether it's international or domestic? It's outside of your normal routine. And so you can't practice that type of stuff. But if you make your travel close to your routine, it makes it easier to go through those PCCs and PCIs. I know you and I have both done international travel, but I have done for, gosh, I think it was 3 to 4 years, probably every week I was traveling internationally. And usually it was to the same place, Mexico City, Brazil, someplace in Europe. And I'm spent months in Europe, months in Sydney, Australia, and that area. So you and I have both been to some seedy areas, but some beautiful areas too. And you absolutely have to raise that level of awareness. If you don't, you just put yourself in a dangerous situation. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, those places you just mentioned, Brazil is a no-brainer. There's a lot of areas of Brazil that are very dangerous, but even Sydney, Australia has got some neighborhoods that are sketch. Yeah. And you better be really careful.
I won't go into the story, but we had some very, very interesting places where, again, I took risks and I probably shouldn't have, but that's part of being young, I reckon.
Well, you got to live life. You got to
Yeah.
experience it. And different people are going to accept different levels of risk. I mean, are we talking about skydiving without a parachute here? No,
Nah.
it's not that bad. You got to get out there. And if you're going to try to climb Mount Everest, you're going to train for months and you're going to
Yeah.
learn how to do all that kind of stuff. And depending on the weather and everything, even if you're in shape to do it, you might not make it. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
So this was a fun story because it did bring back some memories of when we were kids, when I've gone to different places and had similar types of experiences. I love to camp. I love to hike. And so I know those feelings that you go through when you think things are going to go one way. And then because somebody makes a mistake, somebody was unprepared, or just sheer bad luck,
Yeah.
all your plans change. And that's a big part of just being better prepared, is thinking things through ahead of time, trying to plan better on how to respond well and recover faster. So even if you can't plan for every problem that might exist in a desert cavern type of situation, but gosh, if you can't just work it through in your head, these different things that could happen, and then just go, okay, here's how I would respond if that happened. And it should make you feel more comfortable so that you can be at that relaxed state of awareness instead of being completely comatose or super high level. So those are my parting shots. Great story. Thanks, Ed, for sharing with us today.
Thank you, Matt. And in closing, I'll say my parting shot is that I will say, again, people don't plan to fail. They fail to plan. And everything you do, whether you know it or not, you're calculating a little bit of risk assessment in your mind. And you are going to accept certain levels of risk for everything you do. You do have to take reasonable steps and reasonable measures. And you can only plan, prepare, and everything like that so much and have so much contingency. And when something happens, regardless of what it is that you're doing, I think the biggest thing for me is that as Gen Xers and probably leaders in our communities or groups, you want to have just enough experience and savvy from your background, training, and experiences to be problem solving and stay positive, pragmatic, and professional, and get through that situation, whether you planned it, whether you were prepared for it, whether you have contingencies for it, whatever happens, you're the leader that calms everybody down, and you think outside the box, you think critically, and you get yourself out of that situation and back home safe. All right. And friends, that is our story time today.
Right. This is Matt Marshall signing off.
And this is Ed Wasson signing off. Take care. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, TikTok. We're everywhere.